Well, my first guest has been a dancer, actor, director, choreographer, acting coach, and an author. Today we're going to find out more about the Gypsy series of books from Christine Fournier. Christine, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Lynn. It's good to be here.
Now, before we continue, let's talk about a word, gypsy, and maybe you can clarify that for the viewers so they'll know what we're talking about.
It happens often. Most people think of gypsy as those people who used to travel across Europe and they were always in wagons, you know, selling their wares and struggling through winters. And this kind of gypsy is not that. Gypsy is a beloved term for a performer who goes from show to show. So it's a very in show business term. So gypsy is that.
Okay, and you've written 3 books.
Yes.
And the 4th one in progress.
Yes. Actually, how it all began was I happened to be going through some old scrapbooks of my showbiz days and found one of the original route sheets, which is a listing of all the cities, dates, and theaters on the itinerary for the tour. And I pulled it out and I looked at it and I said, this would be a great grid for a book. So I took a lined pad and sat down city to city, and all the memories started just popping up.
Back.
Oh my goodness. I mean, they were talking about 45 years ago. And they were just so vivid, and I thought, I've got to write this book, but it's going to be a novel. It's going to be roughly based. The tour will be actual, but the characters and the events will be based in kind of a mixture of actual people I worked with, and then more or less composites of people.
Okay. And why don't you tell our viewers just what you did back on that tour? It's many. What you were.
Well, I was a dancer. I went to New York to be a dancer, and it was the 60s when Broadway shows were just amazing, wonderfully written and fabulously popular. Hello, Dolly, and Fiddler on the Roof, and Mame, and there were so many great shows, Man of La Mancha. And my first big job was a national tour of how to succeed in business without really trying. 22 cities in 9 months. And for a young girl from Minnesota, this was really the big start. And we went through the tour, and then I came back to New York, and then I got hired to go international with West Side Story. Came back. That winter was a little bit lean because you go from job to job, the gypsy.
Okay.
And then I got hired back for the second national tour of How to Succeed, and I closed the Broadway show. They were going to close it, and they put together a cast of all these people who had done various companies of How to Succeed. So I went out another 6 months, and when I returned, I actually got my first original Broadway show, Sweet Charity. So it was kind of a natural progression. But these books are based on these actual experiences and then fictionalized for obvious reasons.
Sure, of course. Okay, now when you're on 9 months, 21 cities,
yes.
Do you do anything? Did you have time to see the cities or become acquainted with where you were in new places?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it depends on the city. Now, some cities we would actually have open-end engagements. San Francisco, I remember Washington, D.C., Boston, where you have a number of weeks where you can actually rent an apartment and cook in and have kind of a somewhat normal existence, whereas if it's just a 1 week or a split week, which we had a few of in the early part of the tour, then you really have to eat in restaurants, and it's a little bit more, less time. Although your days are pretty much free if you want to sightsee, if you want to go to a movie, if you want to shop, you know, there is that. But then you have to always be ready to go on that night.
Yeah, and it has to be very strenuous.
It is. 8 shows a week, 2 matinees a week, plus so those double show days are Wednesdays and Saturdays, and there's always 1 day a week off, which is referred to in the theater as dark. And that's when either you have a night off, if you're in New York, you have a dark day, that's your day you do laundry and shopping. But if you're on the road, a lot of times that dark day is actually the travel day. So you pack up, you go out, you get on a plane or a train or even a bus, and then that whole next day you're on the move. And then you get back into the next town, settle into your apartment or your hotel room, whatever it happens to be.
And you're back at it.
You're at it again.
Okay.
You never stop.
What did you like the most about doing that?
Oh, I was much younger, and it was a chance to see the country and to be in different regions. It was my first trip to the South, and in the first book, Gypsy Nights, I actually have written of actual events. We were in Memphis when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, so that we were the only company on the road that night that actually went on and performed. And it was the most odd feeling because there we were, it was a packed house, we're performing, we're getting laughs coming back. So that was a very strange event. I was also in one stop in Seattle where I had a Sunday night off and saw the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan the first time they were ever on television here, and I said to myself, something is going to happen to the music industry. So there was that event. There was also segregation at that time in the Deep South, and we played places like New Orleans, and we were in Memphis, Tennessee, and so many places that from the North, and being a Yankee girl, it was really hard to put my mind around, colored drinking fountains and colored restrooms. And one night it was pouring rain, and two of the girls and myself were going back to the hotel in New Orleans, and we went to get into a cab that pulled up, and it was a black driver. And he took one look and he said, "Oh, ladies, I can't take your fare." And it was pouring rain. We said, "Well, why not?" That's also in the book.
Okay.
And he said, "Because if I take you, you're a white customer, I'll lose my license." It was that severe. And all of us were in such a quandary over that. It was just such a strange experience.
Yeah, a real shock to the,
it was
like
a shock.
You say, people living in Minnesota at
Exactly,
that time.
exactly. But there were so many, but in answer to your question, I think it's such an education because you're doing what you love to do, so that part is the icing on the cake. But then there are all these adventures of meeting people and audience members and press parties and getting a chance to go out and explore. We were in New Orleans 3 weeks just before Christmas, and everything was decorated, and it just had an ambiance about it that was so special. So there are those moments. Getting to Houston on Christmas Day and having it 57 degrees when you're from Minnesota, that was kind of a shock too. So there are all these wonderful moments. But yeah, it was one of the best parts of my career.
Yeah, and then you gave that up.
Well, I sort of gave it up. My first marriage, we decided, my husband was a photographer, and we decided we didn't want to live in New York and raise a child, so we moved to Minnesota, and I got here 6 months and had my daughter just before Chanhassen was being built. And they wanted a professional choreographer, and they called me, and so I was hired as their original choreographer. So that's how so my career went on, but in a different capacity.
Okay.
More dinner theater, commercials.
Yeah, because you've been very active here teaching and doing choreography and through the years. So you really never left it.
No, I never did. No. And now being able to teach and be able to be a mentor and pass that process on is so, so wonderful.
Well, Christine, I want to thank you for coming today, and good luck with that fourth book that you're working on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn.